Was he dead? It sure hurt. He opened his eyes. The light streaming through from above was a searing on his retinas. His eyelids fluttered. He tried moving, found it could do that. So he looked and moved together, and found out where he was. The last part of the fissure, just below the surface. He was hanging, sagging, down into the crevice, too wide to slip through and fall. But he had to have come that way. The ants were everywhere, plastered to the sides of the fissure, and he noticed distastefully, to him. Mostly on his legs, but his back and hands and even his chest had ground ant packed on them. He was surrounded. He propped a boot against the curve of each wall and raised himself erect. He examined the exit, glaring brightly and painfully. Not too far. He glanced again at that last narrow section between his boots. It wasn't wide enough for his helmet. He shuddered, turned back to the light. Better not to think about it. It took him several tries to get a grip on the sides of the opening. The pain steadily increased in almost every area, and his muscles had begun almost immediately to tremble and knot. Hurt bad, he thought dimly. Really, really bad. He began pulling himself up and knew at once he wouldn't make it. He was too weak. He was too tired. It hurt too much. He had no idea how much power was left in the suit. He couldn't read the dial. He tried marshalling a final effort. Nope. Falling. Colors flashed dizzily across his eyes, followed by rhythmic waves of feverish heat. Falling. Straight back, his grip going and lost down here. Armored hands on his upper arms lifted him easily, miraculously, into the open air and sunlight. He squinted from side to side, vaguely recognizing the shapes of the warriors beside him. He nodded to them. He straightened up proudly. He crumpled, without warning, onto his heels. Alive. Even now. Even this. No pity.
Felix!
He recognized the voice. Forrest? No. Schoen. Canada. Her shadow blotted out the bright light as she leaned over him.
Felix, you made it! You made it! We thought you were lost. Nathan thought you were lost. Oh, Felix!
And she hugged him. Awkwardly. Painfully. He groaned and tried to pull away, but she wouldn't let go. She hugged him again.
Oh, Felix! They should give you a medal, too.
The second shadow before him was Kent. He saw it hanging on the front of the great blue chest armor, even though it wasn't there. He saw it. It glinted in the sun. Perfect. Now was the time to pop his suit, he thought in a wave of scalding bitterness. And with that thought, the dark and the cold and the strength of both returned at last, slamming in from all sides at once, protecting and separating him once more. With a vengeance, the engine had returned. He slept. Shaking pain. Shaking and pain. He awoke only because he had to, and there was the psychotech, red-faced and shaking his shoulders and screaming.
I'm so sorry! So sorry! Oh, God! I am!
Two meditechs dragged him away. He struggled with them to get back.
You don't understand!
He shouted at them. A doctor type bearing white-haired authority appeared. He tried to soothe him.
You don't understand!
The psychotech pleaded.
It's my fault!
Nonsense, son, purred the doctor. The ants did this to him. Felix smiled.
No, no! It was me!
A third Meditech pressed something against his arm. Almost at once, the man began to calm. His shouting fell to unintelligible mutters. Soon, he was slumped between the two Meditechs. They hoisted him away. See to it that he's looked after, the doctor called to them.
Yes, doctor,
one of them called back. Felix realized he was still lying in his open suit. They must have just brought him up. White-gloved hands appeared overhead and fiddled around him. He couldn't see their owners. Maybe there weren't any. A second doctor type, older and female, appeared beside the first. The emblem over her left pocket was huge and colorful. "I'm sorry, Chief," the doctor told her.
Don't give it a thought,
she replied soothingly.
These things happen in war.
Felix smiled again. The doctor turned to another woman, hurrying past. "Leclerc," he called. "What happened here?" Leclerc was pretty. Not blonde, though. She shrugged her shoulders.
That psychotech evidently worked with this man. He felt responsible for sending him down again and having this.
Felix regarded the banks of flickering lights all around him. One of the magic gloves reappeared. It placed a clear nozzle into the suit beside his chin. It sucked and gurgled. Leclerc was still talking,
screaming and shouting about how he'd already been through too much.
"The psych?" asked the doctor.
"No,"
replied Leclerc. She pointed a clipboard at Felix.
"This guy, the scout, said he'd already had 4 major medicals and some ungodly number of... Hey, he's awake!" 4 major medicals,
echoed the older woman, the chief. She looked at the older doctor unhappily.
How's that possible?
It's not, the doctor assured her firmly. It's not. Then he leaned forward over Felix and became fatherly. "Son, have you ever been in intensive medical before now? Do you recognize this room?" Felix couldn't speak, but the engine could still smile. It did. It seemed to scare them. Good. He slept. It was perfect. He recognized the voices because he had gone to sleep hearing them. He recognized their problem the same way. It seemed a great deal of trouble to open his eyes, and since he could already enjoy their uneasiness without it, he didn't. He was a computer glitch, and it wasn't anybody's fault. Still, something had to be done. His group, his A-team, had been reported wiped out, so he, Felix, was too. Only he wasn't. His number was still in there somewhere in the other banks, and that's why they kept calling him, because they called everybody from those outfits that weren't there. Why take them out of the computer? But anyway, that's how it happened. It's a tragedy, and unfair, but what are we going to do about it when they find out? It'll be our necks either way, you know, it will, Chief. Chief agreed. Something had to be done. But what? The doctor wanted to know. Chief had an idea, and the doctor didn't like it. But how did he think the chief felt about it? It's just that their only chance was in the records themselves. No option. They decided to leave him with 12 drops instead of 20, 5 majors instead of 13, 1 major medical instead of 5. It was the only way. Felix heard it all. He pronounced it perfect. He became aware of days. Different meditechs came at different times, and then all again. One day he awoke to a solid ceiling instead of the clear curved dome of intensive medical. A meditech came to give him an explanation of his condition. There was a long list of injuries in it. Felix was enjoying watching the man's lips work, so elastic, when suddenly they stopped. "You're not even listening," accused the irritated man.
Don't you even care?" "Of course," replied Felix in a clear, strong engine voice. There was a commotion in the corridor outside of his room. He heard the name Kent and opened his eyes as the shaft of light crossed toward him. There he was, huge shoulders silhouetted. A meditech stood beside him. Something odd. They had stopped talking. They were staring at something beside him. The meditech ran off in a hurry. Felix rolled over on his side and saw the crumpled psychotech, blood still pulsing from his wrists. Felix rolled back onto his back and closed his eyes. He needed all his rest if he wanted to kill ants. He had to work out in secret because the Physi-Tech didn't understand it would make him stop. The Physi-Tech had never dropped, and he didn't know the shame of a body that just kept failing. He visited his suit often. It was fine.